This is Saxon's second edition, Algebra 1/2, Lesson 121. This lesson is on Probability Part 2, Independent Events. Now, we already started probability and have been working with that a little bit for the last few lessons. So, we say that events that don't affect one another are independent events. They're independent of each other. So, for example, if Danny flips a dime and Paul flips a penny, what happens with Danny's flip doesn't affect Paul's flip at all. So then we can say that those two flips are independent of each other. The probability of independent events occurring in a designated order is the product, which means multiply, of the probabilities of the individual events. Now we express probability usually as a fraction. So product of the probability means we're going to be multiplying fractions. So a tree diagram can be used to demonstrate the probability of independent events that occur in a designated order. This diagram here shows you probability of possible outcomes if you flip a coin 2 times. So the first time you flip it, it can either come up heads or tails. The second flip, this coin could come up heads or tails. You could have a heads, like the first time it was heads, the second time it was heads, or it could be the first time heads, the second time tails, or it could be, if it came up tails the first time, it could be tails, heads the second time, or tails, then tails again on the second. So on a single toss, the probability of getting heads is 1 out of 2. But the probability of getting a tails is also 1 out of 2. There are only 4 possibilities on 2 tosses. If the first toss is heads, the second toss can be heads or tails. If the first toss is tails, the second can be either heads or tails. There are no other possible outcomes with 2 tosses. So the probability of getting any one of these outcomes is 1 out of 1, 2, 3, 4. So we can say 1/2 times 1/2 is 1/4. Okay, this is if we flipped a coin 3 times. The first time you get either a heads or a tails. The second time you can get heads or tails. If you got tails, you can either get heads or tails the second time. And then the third flip, if you got heads, you might get heads, or you could have gotten heads, tails, or it could have gone heads, tails, heads, or heads, tails, and so forth. So let's look at that. A fair coin is tossed 3 times. What is the probability that it will come up heads every time? Alright, well, the first time it's tossed, you have a 1 in 2 chance of getting heads. The second time, you also have a 1 in 2 chance. And the third time, you again have a 1 in 2 chance of getting heads. So we multiply those 3 probabilities and we get a 1 in 8 chance or probability that it will come up heads every single time for 3 times. A fair coin is tossed 4 times and it comes up heads each time. What's the probability that it will come up heads on the next toss, which would be the 5th toss? Alright? It's a 1 in 2 chance every time it's tossed. So this is what you do. You multiply all the probabilities, and we know that 2 to the 5th power is 32. So you see there's only a 1 in 32 chance that it's going to come up heads 5 times in a row. So your chances are getting slimmer and slimmer. Alright, now let's look at this spinner. We're going to spin this spinner 3 times. We're going to say it's spun 3 times. What's the probability that it will stop on 3, 5, and 1 in that order? Well, since there's only one 3 out of 8 numbers, then you've got a 1 in 8 chance. For a 5, you only have one 5 out of 8 numbers, so you again have a 1 in 8 chance. And there's only one 1 out of 8. So again, a 1 in 8 chance. So 8 times 8 is 64, and 64 times 8, I believe, is 256, if I'm correct. No. 1 in 512. I didn't go quite far enough. So, a 1 in 512 chance. If you were betting on that, that wouldn't be a very safe bet, would it? This problem says that the spinner is spun twice. What's the probability that it will stop on either 3 or 5 the first time and will stop on 2 the second time? Alright, well, it can stop on either 3 or 5. So there's 1 3, 1 5 out of 8 numbers. So that's 2 chances out of 8 times, there's only 1 2, 1 out of 8. So we'll multiply those. 2 times 1 is 2, and 8 times 8 is 64, and that will reduce to 1 in 32. A 1 in 32 chance that that particular thing will happen. Alright, good job. I'll see you next time for lesson 122.